Life has a strange way of teaching us that not everything unfolds according to our carefully planned timelines. We expect relationships to heal slowly, people to change gradually, and hearts to soften step by step. That's the framework. Most of us understand cause and effect progress that follows a linear path. But the reality is that God does not always work according to the logic of gradualism. Sometimes his movements in the human heart are instantaneous, almost shocking in their speed. One day a person seems distant, cold, or even resistant, and the very next something within them shifts and suddenly they see you, they value you, they remember the connection they almost lost. That kind of transformation cannot be explained by human reasoning alone. It is a signature of divine intervention. Think about it. If change only ever happened slowly, then everything in life would be predictable, manageable, and controllable by human effort. But relationships, love, and reconciliation exist in a realm that transcends mere predictability. There is mystery involved because human beings themselves are mysteries. We are not machines where you press a button and expect a guaranteed result. We are souls bound up with longings, fears, memories, and desires that are often unconscious, even to ourselves. And when God touches that level of being, the transformation can happen in an instant because he bypasses the layers of resistance we've built and speaks directly to the heart. There's a psychological truth here as well. Often people live with divided minds. Part of them may be convinced they should move on, detach, or harden themselves against you. But underneath, another part still carries the memory of connection, still knows the value of what was shared, still recognizes the authenticity of the bond. For a while, the louder voice, the one saying, stay away, protect yourself, don't look back, wins the battle. Yet all it takes is one moment of clarity, one spark of truth, and the balance shifts. Suddenly, the heart realigns with what it secretly always knew. And that moment, that instant feels miraculous because it cannot be manufactured by sheer persuasion or effort. It is something deeper breaking through. We've all seen this dynamic play out in other areas of life. A person might struggle for years with an addiction, unable to break free no matter how hard they try. Then one day, in a moment of absolute clarity, they decide enough. I can't live like this anymore, and they walk away from what bound them. That doesn't mean there wasn't a long buildup. It means the culmination of everything finally converged in a single moment, and the decision was made. Love works in the same way. The shift may look instant, but it is God's timing that has been shaping it all along. What makes this particularly important to grasp is that it removes the burden from your shoulders. You cannot force someone to change their heart. You cannot argue them back into love. You cannot manipulate them into seeing your worth. But when God moves, the weight shifts instantly, and what seemed impossible suddenly becomes reality. The heart that was turned away can in a moment be turned back toward you. Not through pressure, not through pleading, but through divine orchestration. That's why you should never lose hope when things look stagnant or stuck. Just because nothing seems to be happening doesn't mean nothing is happening. Often God works beneath the surface in ways you cannot see, preparing the heart for the very instant when change will arrive. And when it does, it won't trickle in gradually. It will arrive with the force of recognition, the shock of truth, the unmistakable sense that something larger than you is at work. So don't mistake delay for denial. Don't assume silence means abandonment. And don't underestimate the power of sudden transformation. Because when God decides it is time, the turnaround will not be subtle. It will be immediate, undeniable, and unmistakable. The truth you need to hold on to is this. When God shifts a heart, it doesn't take years. It doesn't take endless driving. It takes one divine moment. And that moment can come at any time, even when you least expect it. Stay ready because the miracle may not be gradual. It may be instant, and when it happens, you'll know it was never coincidence. It was always God. When God begins to turn someone's heart back towards you, one of the first signs you'll notice is an awakening of memory within them. It's as though the walls they once built to distance themselves begin to crumble. And in that breaking down, the truth of what was shared begins to resurface. People can suppress, deny, and distract themselves for a time. But the human heart has a way of holding on to what is real, even when the mind insists on moving on. And when God intervenes, He has a way of stirring those buried memories so that the person begins to feel the weight of what they had and what they stand to lose if they continue on the path of separation. Psychologically, this makes sense. When someone tries to sever ties with a deep connection, they often resort to rationalizations, convincing themselves that it wasn't real, that it wasn't as valuable as it seemed, or that they will be better off without it. But rationalizations are fragile. They can only hold as long as the deeper emotional truth remains suppressed. And truth, by its very nature, demands to surface. That's why people who once seemed resolute in leaving can suddenly find themselves haunted by flashbacks of laughter of conversations that penetrated to the soul of moments where they felt completely understood. Those aren't accidents. They are the stirrings of conscience and memory, the subtle reminders that the bond they are trying to escape is not so easily erased. This is where divine timing enters. God has a way of orchestrating circumstances that trigger those memories at the precise moment when the heart is ready to reconsider. It might be a familiar song, a place you once shared, or even a random word from a stranger that echoes a private moment only you and they would understand. These are not coincidences. They are what Carl Jung referred to as synchronicities, moments where inner meaning and external events converge, pointing to something larger at work. And in the realm of relationships, they often serve as reminders from God that the bond is not dead, that the story is not over. But let's also be clear, this isn't merely nostalgia. Nostalgia can be shallow. It can make us long for the past without any real conviction for the future. What we're speaking about here is conviction, an awakening in the soul where the person realizes they are incomplete without that connection. And that realization often comes with discomfort because it means facing the truth. They try to suppress. That's why so many people resist it at first. They try to numb themselves. They bury themselves in distractions. They even try to replace the relationship with another. Yet no matter how much they resist, the truth of what God has placed in their heart cannot be permanently buried. Philosophically, this speaks to a larger principle about human beings. We are creatures of meaning, not merely creatures of utility. We don't thrive by filling our lives with substitutes. We thrive when we align ourselves with what is authentic. And when a relationship carries authenticity, when it has depth, resonance, and soul, then it imprints itself into our being in a way that cannot be undone. That's why some connections stand the test of time, even through silence, distance, or conflict. They have what psychologists might call attachment, but more profoundly what theologians might call covenant. A covenant cannot simply be erased by decision alone because it is anchored in something deeper than willpower. So when God turns someone's heart back to you, it often begins with these sudden recollections and awareness that no amount of denial can erase the truth of what was shared. And in that moment of realization, they begin to see you not through the lens of pride or hurt or fear, but through the lens of truth. The truth that your presence brought them life. The truth that your absence leaves them diminished. The truth that running away will not solve the longing because the longing itself is divinely implanted. And here's the part you must remember. Your role is not to force those memories into being. It is not your task to manipulate or constantly remind them of what was. That work belongs to God. And He is far more effective at piercing the human heart than any words or actions you could muster. Your task is to remain grounded, to remain faithful to your own path, so that when the moment of realization comes, you are not bitter, hardened, or resentful, but ready to step into what God is restoring. The power of this truth is simple yet profound memory, awakened by divine timing, can change the direction of a life in an instant. What was once dismissed as over can suddenly become undeniable again. So hold on to this. When the time is right, God will bring the past to their remembrance, not to torment them, but to reawaken them to the truth they once knew. And in that awakening, the door to restoration opens wide. One of the clearest signs that God is turning someone's heart back towards you is the stirring of conviction within them. It's that inner restlessness that refuses to let them remain comfortable in their separation. They might try to move on, distract themselves with work, indulge in temporary pleasures, or even pursue other relationships. But somewhere deep inside, there is a quiet voice that will not be silenced. That voice is the conscience. And when God speaks through it, it carries a weight that no amount of denial can escape. Psychologically, this is important to understand because human beings are masters at constructing narratives that justify their choices. When someone pulls away from a relationship, they often build a case in their mind to explain why it was necessary. Maybe they felt misunderstood. Maybe they believed they would find more freedom elsewhere. Or maybe they simply convinced themselves that love had faded. But narratives are fragile when they stand on untruth. Reality has a way of poking holes in the stories we tell ourselves. And over time, the cracks widen. That's when conviction sets in. It doesn't come as a thunderclap. At first, it comes as a whisper, a knowing feeling that something is off, that they have walked away from something irreplaceable. And here's where the divine hand becomes evident. Conviction is not merely psychological guilt. It is spiritual awakening. It's the realization that what they abandoned was not just another relationship, but perhaps the very connection designed for their growth, their healing, and their destiny. It is God reminding them that the bond they left behind carries eternal significance. That kind of conviction can be deeply uncomfortable. But discomfort is often the catalyst for change. In fact, people rarely transform in moments at ease. They transform when the tension between who they are and who they are called to be becomes unbearable. Think of how this works in practice. They may find themselves lying awake at night, unable to quiet their thoughts. They may feel pangs of regret in situations where they once felt justified. They might even hear your name or something connected to you in places they least expected, and suddenly that quiet voice grows louder. You need to go back. You need to make this right. That's not coincidence. It's the alignment of conscience with divine timing. And when it happens, it's almost impossible to ignore because it shakes the very foundation of their chosen narrative. Philosophically, this moment of conviction reveals something profound about human beings. We are moral creatures wired to seek truth even when it disrupts our comfort. We can deny it for a while, but denial is a temporary refuge. Sooner or later, reality asserts itself. And when it does, it forces us to confront what we have been running from. In this case, the reality is that love cannot simply be switched off like a light. If it was genuine, if it carried depth and authenticity, it will continue to echo in the corridors of the soul until it is faced. Now, it's crucial to understand your place in this process. Conviction is the work of God, not the work of manipulation. You don't need to pressure, remind, or chase after the one whose heart is being stirred. In fact, doing so can backfire because true conviction must arise from within. It has to be their realization, not your insistence. What you must do is stay aligned with your own truth. Keep yourself grounded and allow space for God to do the stirring. When their conscience begins to speak louder than their excuses, they will have no choice but to reckon with it. And what does this reckoning look like? It often begins as an inner conflict, a wrestling between pride and humility, between justification and truth. That struggle is painful, but it is also redemptive because it strips away illusions and brings the heart face to face with what truly matters. And when someone reaches that point, when they can no longer live at peace with their excuses, they are forced to take action. Conviction left unresolved always demands a response. So when you see signs of conviction rising in the other person, don't underestimate its power. That discomfort they feel, that unease that won't let them rest, is the very tool God is using to redirect their path. It may not happen overnight, and then they may wrestle with it longer than you'd like, but once conviction has taken hold, it becomes a force that cannot be ignored. The truth is simple. When God begins to turn someone's heart back to you, He does so by awakening their conscience. That inner stirring is His way of saying, you cannot walk away from what I have joined together. And once the heart is pierced by that truth, nothing else will satisfy until it is answered. When God begins to turn someone's heart back to you, one of the most profound shifts you'll notice is a change in their attitude. This isn't just surface level politeness, nor is it a temporary softening that quickly fades back into old patterns. It is a deeper transformation, a reorientation of perspective that emerges from the inside out. What was once marked by defensiveness, coldness, or indifference starts to give way to humility, openness, and a willingness to listen. And that is no small thing, because a shift in attitude always precedes a change in action. Psychologically, attitude functions as the lens through which a person interprets reality. If that lens is clouded by pride, bitterness, or fear, then everything they perceive becomes distorted. They will read meaning into your words that you never intended. They will misinterpret kindness as manipulation or distance as rejection. But when that lens is cleansed, when pride gives way to humility, when resentment dissolves into understanding, suddenly the same reality looks entirely different. What once appeared to them as a closed door now begins to resemble an open invitation. That's the power of a shift in attitude. It doesn't always change the external circumstances right away, but it radically transforms how a person sees those circumstances. Philosophically, this is significant because it reflects a deeper truth about human beings. Our actions follow from our perception, and our perception is shaped by the condition of our hearts. If someone once walked away from you, chances are their perception was clouded. They may have only seen the flaws, the disappointments, or the unmet expectations. But when God begins to soften a heart, it's as though He clears away the fog. The same person they once dismissed suddenly becomes visible in a new light. They start to remember the goodness, the sacrifices, the love that was once taken for granted. And with that memory comes gratitude, which is itself a profound transformation of attitude. Now here's the thing, an attitude shift is not always dramatic. Sometimes it reveals itself subtly. You might notice it in the tone of their words, where harshness used to dominate, but gentleness begins to emerge. You might see it in their willingness to initiate communication, to bridge gaps rather than widen them. Or you may simply sense it in their posture toward you, a softening, a reduction of defensiveness, an openness that wasn't there before. That shift is evidence that something deeper is happening, because people rarely change their attitudes on their own. Most of the time it takes a disruption, a conviction, or a divine nudge to break through the walls they've built. It's important to understand that a change in attitude is often the groundwork for reconciliation. People don't wake up one day and suddenly decide to rewrite their story. They wrestle first. They go through a process of inner negotiation where their old beliefs clash with new realizations. That's why it is so vital not to underestimate the power of attitude. It might look small, almost imperceptible from the outside, but internally it's a massive restructuring. When pride is displaced by humility, when bitterness is replaced with empathy, the heart is finally in a position to move toward reconciliation. And this is where faith comes into play. Because if you are waiting on God to turn someone's heart back to you, you cannot control the pace or the process of their change. What you can do is recognize the shift when it happens and respond to it with wisdom. Don't smother it with impatience, and don't dismiss it out of fear. Understand that when someone's attitude begins to change, it's a signal that God is already at work within them. It's evidence that their heart is softening, their perception is expanding, and their spirit is being prepared for something greater. So when you notice the shift, let it strengthen your faith. Let it remind you that change always begins within. And what begins within can't help but manifest outwardly in time. A heart turned by God cannot remain closed forever. The change in attitude is the whisper of what's coming. The first sign of doors reopening, of conversations being possible again, of love being rekindled on a deeper and more mature foundation. The thought I want to leave you with is this: do not despise small beginnings. A softened word, a lighter tone, an open posture. These are not minor details. They are sacred signals that the heart is in motion. And when God begins a transformation in someone's heart, even the smallest shift in attitude carries within it the seed of reconciliation. Pay attention to those signs, because they are often the quiet evidence that restoration is already on its way. When God is turning someone's heart back to you, one of the unmistakable signs is the awakening of remorse within them. It's not simply a passing feeling of guilt, nor is it a shallow attempt to ease their own conscience. Real remorse is something deeper. It's the recognition of the wound they've caused, paired with the painful realization that their actions were not aligned with who they were called to be. And this distinction matters because guilt by itself is self-centered. It says, I feel bad about what I did. But remorse is relational. It says, I recognize how what I did hurt you, and I can no longer ignore the weight of that. Psychologically, remorse is transformative because it forces a person to confront themselves honestly. Most people spend their lives avoiding that confrontation. They cover their mistakes with excuses, with justifications, with distractions. They say, well, I had no choice, or it wasn't that bad, or they'll get over it. And in doing so, they protect their fragile sense of self from collapse. But when God intervenes, when he begins to convict the heart, those defenses start to break down. The person can no longer maintain the illusion that they were blameless. They see clearly, often painfully, the role they played in the brokenness, and that clarity is the soil in which true change grows. Philosophically, remorse is an acknowledgement of moral responsibility. It is the human heart's confession that it has fallen short of the ideal, that it has betrayed something sacred. Without remorse, there can be no genuine reconciliation because there is no recognition of the wrong that needs to be healed. Think about it. If someone denies their failures, if they minimize them, they are essentially saying there's nothing to fix, nothing to restore. But when remorse awakens, it declares the opposite. It says there is something broken here, and I had a hand in breaking it, and because of that, I cannot remain the same. What makes remorse so powerful is that it doesn't just dwell in thought, it reshapes behavior. A person who feels remorse begins to act differently. They no longer approach you with entitlement, but with humility. They are not quick to defend themselves, but willing to listen. They don't come to demand, but to rebuild. That's how you know remorse is authentic, because it leads to transformation, not manipulation. And if God is turning someone's heart back to you, he will first lead them through this inner reckoning. They will feel the weight of their actions, not to destroy them, but to make space for something better to emerge. And here's an important point. Remorse is not weakness. It's courage. It takes enormous strength to look into the mirror of your own failures and not turn away. In fact, it is one of the hardest things a human being can do. To admit I was wrong and I caused harm is to strip away the ego's defenses and stand exposed before the truth. But paradoxically, that is where freedom begins. When someone finally acknowledges their failures, they are no longer bound by the lie of perfection. They are now free to build something real, something honest, something rooted in truth rather than illusion. This is why when you see genuine remorse in someone who once hurt you, you should not dismiss it lightly. It is not just an emotional gesture. It is evidence of God at work, because remorse is not something you can force on another person. You can plead, you can argue, you can try to make them see, but until their heart softens under the weight of divine conviction, nothing will change. And when it does happen, when their eyes finally open to the harm they caused, that's when you know something supernatural is unfolding. So if you are in a season where God is turning someone's heart back to you, look for remorse. Listen for it in their words. Watch for it in their actions. Feel it in the humility of their posture. It may be painful for them, and it may stir up old wounds for you. But don't miss its significance, because remorse is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of restoration. The thought I want to leave you with is this. Remorse is sacred. It is the doorway through which healing enters. And when God brings someone to that place, it is not to shame them, but to prepare them and you for reconciliation built on truth. Do not despise it. Do not overlook it. See it for what it is, a signal that the heart has turned and that the possibility of renewal is closer than you think. When God begins to turn someone's heart back to you, one of the clearest signs is a renewed sense of pursuit. And I don't mean pursuit in the shallow sense of sending a quick message or showing up once and then disappearing again. I'm talking about pursuit as an intentional, consistent, and deeply motivated effort to rebuild something that was broken. This is important because relationships by their very nature demand pursuit. Love isn't passive. It requires effort. It's an orientation toward the other, a recognition that value must be demonstrated, not merely assumed. When someone chooses to pursue you again, it is a declaration that you matter enough to warrant their energy, their time, and their focus. And this pursuit is not simply about regaining what was lost. At its core, it's about transformation. It says, I am not content with the distance between us. I am willing to close the gap. That's no small thing, because to pursue someone genuinely is to risk rejection. It requires vulnerability. It requires courage. And it requires a reordering of priorities, placing the relationship above pride, above convenience, above fear. Psychologically, pursuit after separation is fascinating because it reveals a shift in attachment. People only pursue what they believe has worth. When someone begins to reorient their heart toward you, their actions show what their words cannot fully capture, that they have reassessed your value in their life. Think about that. People chase careers, money, distractions, or even new relationships. But eventually, those pursuits reveal their emptiness. When God turns someone's heart back, he simultaneously reorders their vision. Suddenly the person realizes that what they ran from was not a burden, but a blessing. They see clearly, often for the first time, the depth of what you brought into their life. Philosophically, pursuit reflects one of the oldest truths about human existence. That meaning requires commitment. You cannot live a meaningful life by standing still, passively waiting for fulfillment to fall into your lap. You move toward what matters. In the same way, if someone is serious about reconciliation, they must move toward you. They must pursue with a kind of discipline and consistency that proves they are not just speaking out of sentiment, but out of conviction. What does that look like in practice? It looks like showing up when it's inconvenient. It looks like listening more than speaking. It looks like investing time into rebuilding trust rather than demanding immediate restoration. It looks like patience, persistence, and humility, because true pursuit is not desperate. It is steady. It doesn't pressure or manipulate. It doesn't demand that the wound be healed instantly. Instead, it recognizes that healing takes time, and it is willing to walk that road even if it's difficult. This is why pursuit matters so much when God is turning someone's heart back to you. It proves that the remorse you saw earlier was not just emotional turbulence. It proves that reflection has given birth to responsibility. It proves that the conviction of the heart has translated into consistent action. And that's what reconciliation requires. Not only a change of feeling, but a change of behavior. If you find yourself in a place where someone has begun to pursue you again, take note of the way they do it. Ask yourself, is this pursuit rooted in humility, in honesty, in the willingness to serve the relationship rather than exploit it? Because the quality of the pursuit will reveal the quality of the transformation. Shallow pursuit leads to shallow outcomes. But genuine pursuit creates the foundation for something lasting. So when you see that pursuit, don't dismiss it as coincidence. Understand it for what it is. Evidence that God has shifted the heart, not just in thought, but in action. It is the tangible proof that love, when refined through struggle and conviction, can emerge stronger than before. The closing thought I want to leave you with is this: pursuit is love in motion. It is not enough to feel affection or to think fondly about reconciliation. Love must move. It must act. It must take steps toward what it values. And if someone has begun to pursue you again, see it as a sign that something profound is unfolding. Because when God is behind it, pursuit is not just about winning you back. It's about building something new, truer, and more enduring than what was lost.